Okay, let's talk about what's been the biggest complaint or my biggest pet peeve with my Tundra so far. And it has to do with what you see right here. You can look, and I don't know if you can see that there, but it says Flex Fuel on that, an E85. So when I purchased my Tundra back in 2018, I didn't know I had the option of getting a non-flex fuel vehicle, or I would have. My son's 2015 is actually a non-flex fuel vehicle. And the way you can tell that is either there at that gas cap or at your VIN here. And if the fifth digit is a W, which mine is right there, if the fifth digit is a W, Y, then you have a flex fuel vehicle. If it's a Y, it's a non-flex fuel, 5.7. So if you have the 5.7 and the fifth digit in the VIN is a W, it's a flex fuel. If it's a Y, it's a non-flex fuel. Well, here's the problem with that. So in cold weather last year, back in midwinter 2022 and now or midwinter 2023, and now here it is fall of 2023. As the weather turned bad, both times I had a long start. I'll let you take a listen to that and see what that long start sounds like. So generally speaking, it's either a long start where it doesn't crank and then it cranks the second time, or it's a long start and then it goes ahead and starts up. Now, as I looked online about this, mine situation happened last year, went away, maybe came around February's time. I had about 122,000 miles on the truck. Then it came again this year right at about 140,000 in November when we got some unusually cold temperatures down into the low 30s. So started diving down the rabbit hole online and coming up about the problems with the flex fuel 5.7s, issues with the fuel pump, issues with the ECU, and make a long story short, essentially what it means is while your fuel pump's beginning to go, it needs to be replaced and you need to have your ECU flashed, which, you know, it's a decent expense. Or does it actually mean that? And so as I kept going, I came across video by the Car Care Nut where he talked about problems in the second gen Tundras, and he covered that topic of the flex fuel vehicles as well as the fuel pumps and needing to reflash the ECU. But then he said, but what can also cause this is going back and forth between E85 and regular fuel. Now, if you read the owner's manual, it says you should be able to do that. You have to have more than a quarter tank of fuel in the truck when you do it. You have to run the truck for at least 5 miles, I think it is. You also have to make sure that you're putting at least 2.6 gallons or roughly 10 liters if you're using metric fuel in the vehicle at a time. That's not such a big deal. That's never been an issue. Now, I tend to run my truck all the way down to E, and as I read this, it started to occur to me. So that same exact problem will be duplicated by switching back and forth with fuels. Well, I've never put E85 in my vehicle, but I fortunately track all my miles. I have tracked all my miles for the last several years, and I track all my fuel ups on Fuelie, so I know exactly where I fueled up and how much. So as it turns out, both times this happened, it happened after I went to Atlanta to visit my son. While we were there in Atlanta, we filled up, no problems, drove back home, no problems. But the next time I filled back up at home, it was the very next day that I had a problem. So most recently, this occurred on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We came back from Atlanta on Tuesday night. I filled up the truck, only drove it from a mile from the gas station home. The next day I was only working a couple miles away, so I just drove a couple miles. After I drove a couple miles and sat there all day and went out, temperature dropped to about low 40s. I went out, I had the long start. I said, boy, this doesn't seem right. Did this last year. Did it when it was cold out. And so I went back and as I looked and said, hey, this happened right after I filled up here. Well, as it turns out, Atlanta's got some of its own rules in the state of Georgia, at least the metro Atlanta area and the surrounding counties, especially relative to summer gas. Their summer gas is limited at a reed vapor pressure, and I'm not going to bore you with all that, but it's a reed vapor pressure of 7, whereas summer gas in the rest of the state is 9. As you're transitioning from summer to winter gas, you increase the amount of butane, and in winter gas, the amount of ethanol just becomes kind of a free-for-all in terms of up to that 10%. So it got me thinking, well, if the tune on these flex fuel vehicles is such that it depends on the sensor in the fuel pump to be reading accurately, and if you go back and forth between one fuel and another fuel below that a quarter of a tank, is that going to cause that problem? And I thought, well, you know, maybe it did cause that problem. All right, so you can see I'm about a third full of a gas tank here. I'm going to go ahead and fill up with 87 ethanol free today, and I'll explain why we're going to do that and how we're going to fix this little problem we've been having with our flex fuel 5.7 liter Tundra. Okay, we're down in the 30s this morning. Let's see how this goes. Oh, cranked right up. I think I found a solution. Oh, all right, you can see by the frost on my tonneau there that it's been down into the low 30s tonight, about as cold as we get this time of year, late November in Georgia. It's our second day after filling up to see if we can fix the ECU. So we're gonna go ahead and give this a crank this morning and see what it shows us. Man, started right up. So I hope you can see that there. It's actually dropped to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, no trouble cranking. I'm hoping that this stays this way. It seems to be consistent with both times I've had this problem. Okay, so this is day number 6 since we've adjusted our fuel to try to address the long start on the Tundra. This is going to be a cold start. It's not as cold as it has been. It's going to be in the 60s right now, but it has been down in the 30s. Started right up, no problems, no long hesitation start. May have cracked the code on this one, people. I don't know if anybody else has been having trouble with this, but certainly if you have, you want to think about maybe just changing that fuel mixture temporarily, and then making sure when you do your fill-ups you don't run it all the way down to E like I do. In the wintertime, I would go ahead and fill it up at a quarter of a tank. For most people, I think this will probably correct this long start situation. And ultimately, what I think is going on here is that if you're having this flex fuel vehicle long start issue, most likely it's probably not the fuel pump. It's probably the sensor in the fuel pump, and it's probably getting confused on the tune when you go and fill up at gas from one location to another location. So now, gradually, I'm going to go back to the regular fuel because ethanol free around me is almost about $2 more than 10% ethanol gas, which my truck has always run just fine on. So I hope this helps somebody out there. If you found it interesting, please go ahead and hit like, and then go ahead and hit subscribe. The more we comment on this, the better. And if you've had something similar and yours is fixed, not fixed, please leave some information so others might learn from it.